All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Annika, and I'm the Public Affairs Coordinator at the Digital Supercluster. And I'm pleased to welcome you to our Talent and Workforce Development Partner Information webinar. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada, we live, work, and learn on the unceded traditional and ancestral land of Indigenous people. As myself and much of the Supercluster team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And we encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and we will distribute it to all the registrants afterwards. If at any point during the session you have a question, please type it into the Q&A and we'll address them at the end. I'd now like to hand it over to Sydney.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate you all taking the time on this Monday morning. My name is Sydney Goodfellow, and I'm the Director of the Digital Learning Lab here at the Digital Supercluster, which is our talent-specific programming. I've been with the Supercluster for something between 3 and 4 years now, and I've had the pleasure of working with Annika and the team here on our talent work as an organization, and so really an honor to be here with all of you today. So today is part 2 of two info sessions that we've done in response to our call for partners, which, as I mentioned in the first one, we had a really strongly positive response to that call and a big influx of partners. And so this is our way of connecting with the two kind of main partner categories that we saw come in through that call. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that meant. But just in terms of the housekeeping side of things, some of you may have joined for the training specific session in July. And for some of you, this may be your first one. So for those of you who've been here before, the first half-ish is going to feel quite familiar. It's really getting into the overview of who we are as an organization, what the purpose of that call for partners was for us, and kind of that general starting information. From there, we'll get into partnerships as a whole and our approach to partnerships, and then we'll get into some technology specific stuff. So the folks who are here today are largely going to be individuals who work in organizations that work on the technology side, the tool development side of a skilling ecosystem and a learning and development ecosystem. If you're here as a training provider, that's okay as well. Like I said, there's going to be some overlap between the two sessions. As Annika mentioned, we are recording this session and we will be sending out a follow-up email that will include information about both the training session and the technology specific session. So all of that to say, we're going to be talking through a bunch of different things today and really keen to get the conversation going. So like I said, this is our brief agenda. One thing I will call attention to is number 4 there. So we will be doing some Q&A at the end. We'll try and keep about half the time, so about 30 minutes to focus on that. But as we go, it says to post your questions in the chat, but there's also specifically a Q&A function. So if you can post your questions in there, that's great. And then general chatter and comments and whatever else you might like can go through in the chat. So we're going to start with a bit of an overview of what we're really here to do. So I mentioned that the Digital Learning Lab is the team that I'm with here at the Supercluster, and we're building strategic partnerships in talent development. So the call for partners for us was kind of a new approach. Typically, when we are looking for input from the ecosystem, we would run a call for projects, which is a competitive, either a closed cycle or a continuous intake cycle, looking for formed or semi-formed concepts and projects related to skilling and talent development. We've done 2 of those calls so far. I'll talk a little bit about that. But for us, this call for partners was a wholly new approach to work with the ecosystem and kind of build our partner network. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is grow our strategic partnerships so that rather than focusing on kind of a project by project approach, we have a team of people who are like-minded, who have the commitment and the passion behind working in the talent ecosystem so that we can tackle some of these more systemic challenges without doing it in kind of that project by project way. And I'll talk more about what that means as well. So who we are, the Digital Learning Lab is the Digital Supercluster's national platform for talent and workforce development. And what we mean by that is really, as an organization, the Supercluster is committed to growing the innovation and research and development work that happens in Canada. So incentivizing, catalyzing, and creating Canadian-made innovations in some in industries including transportation, health, natural resources, manufacturing, and really focusing on building out that innovation ecosystem within Canada. And a major strategic part of that is, of course, talent development. Talent can be a driving force and a limiting force in the growth of an innovation ecosystem. And it's a major challenge here in Canada in terms of accessing and upskilling and developing the digital workforce across all industries as more and more industries become digitally enabled, if you will. So with that in mind, we have three main pillars within the Digital Learning Lab that are intended to kind of work together cohesively and to help grow the talent ecosystem in general. So we've got our Pathways to Digital Jobs pillar, which is really what the thesis or the question of this call for partners was focused on, is building out that skilling ecosystem, as you'll hear me say over and over again. So here we're looking at pathways to digital jobs, which really means mobility within the workforce to move from one role or industry to another, or within an existing organization. We're looking at building accessible opportunities so people can develop the skills they need to move quickly as ecosystem and as industrial changes happen, whether that's within the tech industry or outside of it. We really look to create these kinds of facilitated pathways from one to another. In the leading digital change pillar, this is really looking at what is the skill set and mindset that's required to lead innovation within an organization. So typically it might be something in more of the senior levels, but it's also really starting with understanding what is the movement within an organization into those senior levels. As we often talk about, entry-level talent tends to be more diverse. And then when you move up the seniority pathway, it becomes less and less so. And so really understanding how to make that mobility and movement within organizations more inclusive. And then thirdly, growing connected communities is, sits kind of beside and alongside both of these two pillars to look at the people side of regional and community development, economic development, access to the benefits and the opportunities of the digital economy, things like what goes around connectivity. So all those people-oriented approaches to community development. So these three things, we see them being kind of cohesive and important to each other. But like I said, really in this call for partners, we're focused on that pathways pillar there. And so looking at the collective outcomes of the Digital Learning Lab and our partners. So in total, the Supercluster has invested roughly $12.7 million, which is leveraged into a roughly $40 million pool of staged project investments across 19 talent-focused projects. So as an organization, as the Supercluster, we have 80 plus projects focused on that innovation side of things. And for us, that, like I said, talent is a really strategic priority. And so this is kind of our approach to that so far. Those projects together are creating more than 6,500 digital skilling and leadership learning and development placements. So when we say learning and development placements, that's one of the ways that we measure our success and the success of our partner projects. And they refer to skilling with line of sight to jobs. So in all things that we do, we really want to ensure that training is not just happening for training's sake, although learning for learning's sake is always important. We really want to understand what are those mechanisms to get someone employed at the other side of that training to make sure it's relevant. Competencies range across the digital sector from AI, ML, DS, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, and really kind of specialized skills within tech, like quantum computing, for example. Upskilling for SMEs, so digital literacy and movement within existing sectors. Digital transformation of organizations, that gets into that digital leadership side, innovation leadership side of things, as well as things like entrepreneurship for women, angel investing. There's a pretty broad range of skills that we focus on. We have a pan-Canadian presence in urban centers across the country, as well as rural and remote areas. Excuse me, a major priority for us is investing in Indigenous-led and Indigenous-driven projects. For example, focusing on connectivity and training in remote areas, like I mentioned. And overall, we're very partner oriented, and in all ways, the supercluster is focused on collaborative innovation and collaboration in general. So we're engaging more than 130 partners across Canada. And part of the goal of this call for partners is to grow that network and to grow the ecosystem for skilling in general. So together with our partners, we are, as we say, changing the way the workforce development happens in Canada. We're doing that through these three main ways. And we'll talk about this when we talk about our kind of principles as a program, but we're really looking at training and placing people first and foremost. So how can we get people job ready faster and more effectively within the digital economy and beyond? How can we grow companies and communities? So that looks at really that leadership and that community, connected communities piece. And then for us, we really see this happening, our role in this, by enabling Canada's training ecosystem. So the opportunity in this space is huge. There's already so much incredible work happening in the learning and development ecosystem in Canada. We've got such a strong network, and we really saw that through this call for partners, some really incredible world-class organizations coming through and interested in taking part. So how can we, through collaborative innovation and through sharing resources and sharing knowledge, ensure that this ecosystem for training is growing and thriving so that people benefit from it, companies benefit from it, communities benefit from it? And that's really the role that we see ourselves playing here at the Supercluster. And like I mentioned too, we really do see the opportunities within the skilling space. It's a strategic priority for the supercluster because we're actively invested in the growth of Canada's innovation and R&D success. But also we see, and we talk about digital specifically, but we see this happening not just in the digital space. We talk about transition to decarbonization and a clean economy, and there's going to be a skilling component that will come with that transition. We talk about the specific transformation of individual sectors and the pace of change that happens in our world. The ability to rapidly skill people and move them from one role or industry and to place them into good, well-paying jobs is something that's not going away. It's something that we're going to need to focus on and build collectively. So an approach that we've been taking here at the Digital Learning Lab is understanding the kind of different pieces that have to fit together to make this system work. So we're calling it the rapid skilling system. And this is just a brief overview of the different parts and pieces. And this is an evolving concept, and it's something that we're looking to build with our partners, but it's to illustrate this kind of platform approach that we're looking to take. And I will say too, a question that comes up is, how does this fit in terms of post-secondary? And we really see post-secondary being critical to this. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but really this is understanding the flow of workers and skill development as it happens across this whole ecosystem, including the important leadership and involvement of post-secondary. So in that rapid skilling system, we start with what we're calling real-time forecasting, which is essentially labor market information and data that happens in a faster and more up-to-date way. And that could include things like artificial intelligence and the tools that kind of pull data from the ecosystem writ large. And it can also be engagement directly with industry partners. So including a private company or an organization that's looking to hire for certain roles in the design of curriculum and content development so that there's a constant feedback loop and understanding of whether those skills are relevant or not. Competency frameworks are really looking at personalization and mobility and portability of skills within that ecosystem. So understanding how can we break a competency up into its foundational pieces so that a person can develop the skills that they need to develop without having to do all the stuff around it, and then stack those competencies and credentials so that they can continue to grow lifelong. Training delivery, of course, is specific to training, but because we're talking about technology today, there's lots of technologies that go around training delivery as well. Things like augmented reality and virtual reality are an example of tools that support with training delivery, as well as things like learning management systems. Credential designation and portability, that's really understanding again, kind of that technical side that goes behind the movement of a competency or credential within that ecosystem. So we talk about things like blockchain, trust, security, privacy, and also validity and the ability to understand when a person has a credential, what does that actually mean? And then, of course, placements and jobs. As I mentioned, we're always trying to move towards that employability piece and long-term employment. And so what skills does a person need to get placed into a meaningful job, but also what are the kind of components that come once they're placed? Things like work integrated learning, things like upskilling within the workforce, and support for organizations to engage and retain employees as well. So we see this whole ecosystem really fitting together to help that accessibility and that mobility of workers within it. So all of that context to hop into our approach to partnerships in general. So as I mentioned, we really are focused on talent development, and we see our role as being the supportive partner within the ecosystem to grow the training and learning and development ecosystem as a whole. Our vision is for a clean, healthy, creative, and digital Canada, which is really to say that the workforce has the skills that they need to thrive in a healthy or health-oriented, creative and digital and clean or decarbonized economy. Within that, like I said, that's the people, companies, and communities having those skills. And our approach to that is, like I said, to reduce the cost and time required to get someone job ready in the digital economy. So really understanding how that needs to happen and growing Canada's world-leading skilling ecosystem, as you've heard me say. To move over into the platform and how that connects to our approach, we typically, and this is an oversimplification, of course, but for the purposes of today, really we're looking at our platform divided into three main pieces in terms of how partners get involved. There's the identification of opportunities, which I'll talk about in my next slide, where partners, ecosystem or partners come up and identify opportunities. Then a team is assembled around that opportunity. And then finally, this is where the platform comes in. The team that is working on that opportunity shares what they're learning and building so that it contributes to systemic change on the whole. So again, rather than individual projects, it's really understanding how this whole system fits together. And for those of you who are posting questions, thank you so much. I see them and we will get to them when we get to the end of the presentation. So please do keep those questions coming. Thank you. So in terms of the opportunities, I mentioned that first part of it is really identifying opportunities. And we see kind of four main ways that opportunities can be identified. And we see this kind of as a constant flow and feedback loop with the community writ large across Canada. So we see opportunities that we have identified. And so things, for example, that fit within those 5 parts of the rapid skilling system, like I mentioned, and we'll talk about some more opportunities that we've identified at the end. As well, there's opportunities that have been identified by you, partners, organizations that are working in this space, that are subject matter experts, that are coming to us and saying, hey, there's a real opportunity here. There's a real challenge that we see again and again. And so these are things that we can kind of co-develop or resource together. Relevant proposals and RFPs, these would come from the ecosystem at large. This could be a federal call for projects. This could be opportunities globally, as we see in that next part. And that's how can we as a team rally around some of these shared challenges so that we can benefit each other and bring more resources into this space together. And how can we as the supercluster support with that? And then finally, domestic and global expansions, are there opportunities around the world? Canada is a leader in education. We're one of the most highly educated nations in the world. This is a challenge that we see not only in Canada, but globally. The ability to skill and train workers quickly and effectively for jobs they want to do is something that is being worked on all around the world. So is there a way that we can develop our leadership and continue to grow our leadership on this in Canada so that we can export some of these concepts and become that kind of go-to place for innovation and learning and development? So part one is, like I said, identifying those opportunities, and then we create a team around those opportunities. And typically we see teams structured with 3 main roles, lead, specialist, and industry. And the lead we often see would be a training provider. So it might be a post-secondary institution, it might be a private training provider, it might be a not-for-profit, but someone who has that kind of, they have a pool of learners that they're looking to develop, and they have some content or curriculum around that. So that would be typically the lead. Not to say that that has to be the case, but that's often what we see. On the specialist side, this is where we would often see technology providers and tool providers, organizations that have specific specialties and specializations within the area that the overall project is working on. So if it's a project that's focusing on competencies in artificial intelligence, The specialists might be people who specialize in AI, MLDS. They might be working with particular demographic groups, or they might be building the technology and the tools that go around that. And then industry, this is kind of a misleading term because we usually refer to industry as private companies, but industry in this case really just represents demand. So who will be hiring the people who will be getting this training? What will happen when these individuals finish it? Is that training relevant within industry? Does industry have buy-in? So that really what we want to see is that kind of customer, if you will, although it's about people instead of products, at the table to ensure that, like I said, it's all relevant. So our principles I talked a little bit about, and this is really kind of how we approach partnerships and what we're here to do. I'll talk about kind of the four main parts, and you can see no matter what role you play in the project as a lead, a specialist, or an industry partner, you are contributing to the development of these principles or these concepts. So on the left-hand side there, we're innovating. We are an innovation-oriented organization at the supercluster. And at that systems level, like I said, we want to make learning and development faster and more efficient, more adaptable to the kind of changes that we're seeing accelerating around the world. And we want to create tools and concepts that change the way that learning happens, both at the flow of work, in the flow of life. Technology is not just something that we need to train people for. It's also something that's driving change in the way that people learn. At the same time that we're innovating, we're also actively training people. And this is kind of the bread and butter. There's always going to be a learning and development placement component to what we do, because first and foremost, we really want to benefit Canada and benefit Canadians, and particularly benefit Canadians that might not always have had access to the benefits and the opportunities of the digital sectors. Combining these things into a platform means that we can make some systemic change. And this is really critical to the partners that are on the call today, because as technology partners, this is really going to be where that kind of coming together of things happens. This is the scalable part of what we do, so that it's an ecosystem of specific training for subject matter, et cetera, that fits within a broader platform that's accessible to learners. And then accessibility is really looking at and acknowledging the systemic barriers that have historically been in place in Canada in terms of accessing learning and education, and trying to reduce those barriers, and really prioritizing and focusing on the reduction of those barriers. Supporting reconciliation and mobilizing investment into Indigenous-led projects is a major priority for us as well. So those are just some of the kind of principles. Now to get into some of the specific opportunities for technology companies and really what we're here to discuss today. So Canada has a pretty strong history in learning and development. If you look into the history of the growth of learning and development, learning management systems, you're going to, there's early learning management systems that came out of Toronto, the University of Alberta, the University of New Brunswick. There's kind of across Canada, we have a really strong history in innovation in learning and development, in addition to our strong post-secondary presence and leadership here. So we really see, not only is there kind of a global challenge that we're looking to solve, but we really believe that Canada kind of has the pieces that it takes to be a leader in this and to really grow in this area. And so, to work with technology partners, this is kind of a different approach for us than what we would usually take. I think I've said, you've probably heard me say before, we tended in the past to focus on training for technology, not technology for training. So training to use technology rather than the kind of innovation that happened, like I mentioned, artificial reality or augmented reality as a tool for training, for example. So we really were focused on that specific training delivery. This is a new approach for us to really go into that technology side of the learning ecosystem and understand how we can support it and grow it. So part of what I'm hoping for today is not that we necessarily have a clear path of like, okay, here's exactly how I get involved as an organization, but here's an idea that I have. Here's something that would really help and benefit my organization. And I know that I can go to the supercluster to talk about this, and we can help to shape the growth of this program to better support technology companies. So we'll save time for that at the end. But really, that's what we're here to talk about today. So some of the ways that we see the support of the technology ecosystem happening within the L&D space is similar to what we talked about with the training partners, is really coming together to solve collective challenges. What is the community of practice around L&D, or learning and development technology, one thing we hear over and over again is how costly and time-consuming content creation is when your focus is technology and that's not your main piece. How do you source really good content or create it in-house, and how do you keep that up to date? So that's one area that we could, look at supporting technology companies and building that out. Capital, of course, is always a challenge. Access to customers, measuring the success within those customers, understanding the success rate and what kind of benefits that an intervention, a technology-based intervention, has in learning and development. So understanding how to measure that ROI, industry validation and relevance, and standards across industries, of course. These are just some things that we're hearing. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. Streamlined learning is really that platform piece that we're trying to build. So understanding how a person can move from one technology platform to another, whether that's switching between employers or between industries, and how these things fit together so that I, as a learner, can look and see, oh, I understand how this movement happens and I understand how this ecosystem works. So really creating that user experience, critical mass, if you will, for the learners themselves. And then, of course, growing the ecosystem. I mentioned that's really the role that we want to play as the supercluster, is supporting you and organizations like yours to grow. So how can we leverage some of these shared resources? How can we enable bigger risks, bolder innovation to happen in a collaborative environment so that we can grow together and ensure that this ecosystem as a whole creates that leadership? So in terms of how we work together, this at a glance is the same as it was in our training presentation as well, but it's a little bit different. So we have three main ways that we work with partners, no matter what type of organization they are. So the first, of course, and the most kind of concrete that we can talk about is open calls. So we will be opening a call for projects or calls for projects this fall, and stay tuned on what exactly that will look like. I've talked a little bit about some of the different programs that will be supporting, but really they're going to be focusing on that pathways pillar that we're talking about today. So the pathway into tech and within technology careers. Secondly, and so that would be funds that are currently available and that we would be allocating to successful proponents. Collaborative proposals would be that one that I mentioned, where there's something else that's not our investment necessarily, but there's an opportunity that you or we see out there in the ecosystem where we say, hey, let's come together and create a proposal around this. We know this is going to benefit the L&D ecosystem. If we pull this person and that person together, we can submit a proposal together that benefits all of us. So that would be the second option. And then the third is really open ideation. So I mentioned some challenges that we hear. What else do you hear? What other things could we do? There's no guarantee that this option is going to be successful, but it's something that we can grow together. And if we hear it a couple of times, we can also pull different groups together. It's really trying to see, like, what haven't we thought of? What else is there? And how can we really make this successful? Which again is a different approach. Typically we would do the open calls, but by building this network of partners, we can now start to create this community of practice. So talking about the new opportunities, so in the fall, like I mentioned, we are going to be doing a talent-specific call focused on those pathways to digital jobs, and we'll outline a range of opportunities in that call. But in the meantime, and this is something that's specific to the technology partners that are here today, we are looking to develop a workforce hub, a digital work, like an online place where workers and learners and companies can come together, training providers can come together, this kind of cohesive place. So we're looking for partners who could help to build that specialized website essentially as this hub. So anybody who has things like content, resources, tools that would live within that hub. The second part is really looking at online assessment tools. So this would again kind of live within that hub, but we're looking specifically here for things that are related to essential or foundational skills that are digital literacy, for example, and then on up through placement into early technology jobs. So things like collaboration and innovation related skills, and really understanding where a person fits, where a person is in their career pathway currently, and then what kinds of competencies or skills they would need to develop moving forward. The third is software, services, or curriculum that are related to pathways. So we talk about pathways a lot, and really what we mean by that is kind of that movement of I'm here now, I've gotten an assessment of my skills or my competencies, and the pathway is how I can see how I get from there to where I'd like to go next, and what kind of happens in there, whether it's training, to access to tools, wraparound supports, employability training, all of the things that would happen within that pathway from A to B. So really looking at the technology that goes into enabling and building those pathways. You can see how these all kind of connect to that resource hub, and they all kind of fit together in a way. But these are specific areas that are also fit within that rapid skilling system that we'll be looking for. So we don't really have a process for how to manage these as they come in advance of the call, but we're really looking to kind of garner or understand interest. So if you are interested in any of these 3 specific components, please just feel free to reach out to me directly, and I will triage from there. So we can really get a sense of who these partners are and what kinds of system that we would want to put in place to kind of build this out in advance of that call. Again, this is really because we know who you are as organizations in some way, because you already submitted to the call for partners. We have this kind of clear understanding already, and we can start to move forward in some of these concepts, which is not to say that there wouldn't be a review process as well, but this is kind of like an advance of what that call would be. Secondly, or fourthly, I guess, rather, we will be doing these open calls in the fall that will relate to the resource hub, the assessment tools, and the pathways, but then also be really specific to building training programs as well. So there might be roles for technology partners that go into those training programs or technology specific parts of that, but that will be what's happening in the fall. And then continued pipeline development is really, like I said, if you have concepts, challenges, ideas, just come to us directly, and we can talk about what that could look like, either in the scope of this pathways concept with this that's happening this fall, or beyond. So our other pillars, like the leading digital change and growing connected communities, feel free to weigh in on concepts that are related to either of those pillars as well. And finally, as we just wrap up this first section, I've mentioned our objective ultimately is to help you grow. Being part of our partner network, we hope, is going to bring a lot of value to your organization within the regular call cycles and the co-investment and the partnerships, but also beyond. And as we're heading into phase 2 of the supercluster, which is going to be happening in the next year or so, really that reinvestment in supercluster as a whole, we're also looking to shape, where does this talent programming go next? What are the big opportunities that we have? So if you have concepts that you didn't hear today, or gaps or opportunities, please don't hesitate to reach out. And in the follow-up that we will include, we will be doing a workshop session on August 12th as well. So stay tuned for that if you want the ability to kind of weigh in a more workshop way than where this is more me talking and then people posting in the chat. That will be more of a collaborative workshop. So with that, I will stop and turn over to some questions that I've seen kind of rolling in already. And so feel free to get those questions going, and thank you so much for listening. Okay, so we've got a question from Kareem here. You're already engaged with 130 partners. What percentage of those are training providers, and what percentage are technology providers? So I'll start with that one, and then I'll move on to the second question you've got there. So the majority are training providers, I would say. Maybe I'm making this up, but maybe 10 or 15% would be technology partners. The majority would be training partners. And then some other kind of subcategories or categories that we have are nonprofits that focus on working with specific demographic groups or specific skill sets. And then the other kind of major category are those industry partners. So those companies that are hiring people that are going through the training. That would be the other kind of main part of that ecosystem, but relatively fewer technology providers, I would say. How many new partners are you looking for from this call for partners? We don't know. There isn't a target that we have in mind. It's really more about the quality of the partnership for us rather than the quantity. So if we can get one incredible partner, amazing. But beyond that, really, we're looking to understand who is in the ecosystem, who's working on this, and even if we don't kind of jump right into a collaborative project in the next month or two, this is also an opportunity for us to say, okay, a year from now, as we're rolling out that phase 2 strategy, we can look to our partner network and say, hey, there's a company that does exactly what we're looking for. Let's reach out to them. We have that understanding. So don't know if that answers your question, but there isn't a set number of partners that we're looking to engage with. How do you understand the industrial skills need forecasting, and match those with a skills development cycle? So this is something that we're looking to also figure out through the projects and the collaborations and the investments that we're making. I'll give one example that I often give in relation to this because I think they're doing it really well. And it's a project that's in our portfolio that's led by BC Tech Association called Digital Lift. Digital Lift is partnered with SkyHive, who may or may not be on the call today, I'm not sure. And they do an assessment, a labor market assessment, AI-based at the start of each year. So it's a 3-year project. So at the start of each year, SkyHive leads a labor market analysis and gets that data input. They also have a network of technology and employer partners, not just technology partners, but things like C-SPAN, for example, and health-related partners that are hiring people who need digital skills that also put input on what kinds of skills they're looking for. So they combine this kind of year-long forecasting with this real-time industry partnerships to design 2 or 3 training cycles that will take place through that year to train for those specific in-demand competencies, and then connect those with work-integrated learning opportunities. So that's an approach that they're taking. And William, to your point there, 1 year in tech is an eternity, absolutely. And so how can we tighten that loop up? And the approach that BC Tech is taking to tighten that is to include this kind of real-time conversation with the industrial partners as well as that year long. So it's kind of a dual approach, looking at overall as an ecosystem, what are we seeing? And then within the network of our partners, what do we need today? So that's kind of how that is happening. But really that's a kind of an open question that we would be looking to solve with our partners and to try different approaches as well. Is success defined, so from Japman, is success defined differently for every project or project type, or are there standard KPIs that quantify and qualify what success looks like? Great question. So it's both and. So I mentioned L&D placements are kind of our core thing. So that's training with line of sight to job. That's always what we measure ourselves against. So how many people are going through training, and how many people who go through that are finishing it, and how many people who finish it get placed in a job. Long-term, we're looking at, again, I mentioned like measuring the efficacy of these programs long-term is a challenge. So I'll give another example. The Canadian Tech Talent Accelerator Project, which is another project in our portfolio that's led by NPower, alongside Microsoft and Blueprint. Blueprint is an evaluator, and they are evaluating the efficacy throughout the course of that project. And so those are metrics that they're measuring themselves against, rather than something that we asked them to do. But that kind of, they're also following participants and supporting participants up to 5 years post-program. So learner outcomes is a major way that we're looking to show and measure success. As well as within those kind of pathways, what pathways are we developing, who's going through them, and how is it benefiting them? So that's kind of the learner side of things. Really also looking at that collaborative piece. So how many industry partners are you working with? Not that there needs to be a quantity, but the quality of those partnerships. And then with the technology partners, because like I said, this is kind of a new approach for us, I think that's something that we would look to co-develop with you. So understanding what is it that this specific technology is looking to do, and what would make sense to measure the success of that. So long answer, but also short answer. Is this data available to us who are in the call? So Kareem, I assume what you're referring to there is that labor market data and information that projects like Digital Lift are working on. So part of that project is at the end of the 3 years, they will publish a kind of report to benefit employers on what they've learned along the way. So that's the point at which we would be able to share that data. But part of our goal through this call for partners is to create more of an open dialogue between partners of data that's gathered so that everyone can benefit from it. That's that. what else? And also, if you wanted to learn more about, let's say, that specific project, for example, reach out to me as well, and I'm happy to chat further about that offline too. So what else do we have? We've got Evan. Do you have any partners which operate at the intersection of training and industry? Oh, love this question. Yes, definitely. Lots of partners are training and technology partners. They have a tool or a platform that they use, and they deliver the training, and they have their own content on it. Or, for example, they have the tool and the content, but then they outsource delivery, and kind of everything in between. And then my follow-up to you would be, did you have something specific in mind when you said that intersection of training and industry? For example, are you speaking about like placement approaches or work integrated learning? So feel free to weigh in with a little bit more context on that one as well. And 1 year in tech is a long time, said William. And yes, I agree with that. In our experience, the job is the training. This is probably a comment for the workshop. So this is a great one. And learning in the flow of work is something that I think that actually technology can help with a lot, maybe more so than content or training could. Facilitated access to technology tools and real-time learning on the job, all that stuff is really, really important. And we don't mean to replace that at all, or to, it's really understanding, okay, what do I need to get employed? And then once I'm employed, the learning continues alongside that. And supporting employers with building out their L&D programs or learning and development programs is really critical. So I would love to hear more on this if you wanted to join on August 12th, and to chat through a little bit more about what you mean by that and what approaches we could take to work in that space. Would be super keen to chat more. Okay, so Evan says, was particularly referring to upskilling candidates while on the job, a formalized work integrated learning process. We'll be back on August 12th. Great. So let's definitely chat through this on the 12th. A formalized work integrated learning process is absolutely something that we want to see. And I will say too, I talked about the kind of 3 pillars where we've got pathways to digital jobs, leading digital change, growing connected communities. What you're talking about in relation to our own kind of approach, which isn't to say that this is how it works everywhere, but for us, that's really that connection point between the pathways to the digital jobs, moving into leading digital change. So now I'm working in I'm working in a job, and I want to move within it. That's when we get into that leading piece, and we want to look at how can people learn on the job to lead innovation programs, build new products, explore new markets, really that kind of movement within that skill set. And looking at a formal pathway for that is something that we're absolutely looking to do. And again, it would kind of be what ladders out of our work in the pathways piece. So Evan, happy to chat with you about that on the 12th, or reach out to me directly as well. Okay, so Jatman, is there any preference between the homegrown learner worker versus the internationally trained migrant worker? Put differently, are learners involved in supercluster affiliated programs required to have any particular visa or residency status? So another really, really fantastic question. And the answer for that would be there isn't an emphasis on one or the other, and we don't have particular rules around visa or residency status as an organization. The training providers that we would work with might, and we can talk about what that could look like. So for example, if we were investing in a project and the lead had specific work that they needed to see or paperwork that they needed to see, then that would be one thing. But for us as an organization, that's not an issue. Typically, our work has focused on people in Canada rather than bringing people to Canada. So we're not really in the space of immigration, kind of advocating for immigration, although that's really critical and important. But more so, once you get to Canada, what kinds of skills would you need to land a job, to validate the credentials that you had in your home country or the country that you came from? And so that's a huge area that we're looking to grow in as well. And really, when we talk about the Pathways platform or Pathways to Digital Jobs, we are looking at it from is there a difference between the approach that you would want to take for someone who has just moved to Canada from another country, which might mean, for example, the validation of credentials that would be different than someone who just graduated from high school in Canada? So there would be some variations to the pathway there that you would create. And then are there other things that would go around that pathway that would support that learner to find success? So for example, would they need language training? Would they need access to other supports like childcare? You know, what are the kinds of ecosystem of other things that can go around that just straight training that could benefit that learner, and how could technology help to facilitate and enable that? And that would be the same. We would want to build a pathway for migrant workers, for workers within just coming out of high school, just coming out of university, you know, like the different pathways, the different kind of path that a learner took to get there. So it's a long-winded answer for you, Chapman, but really it's, we're looking to support all learners. Ryan says, does all programming require the partners to bring the audience, or are there scenarios where you are marketing for and bringing the audience to a partner offer? So we as the supercluster will rarely bring and I assume what you mean by audience is the participants or the learners. Please jump in if that's inaccurate, but we would rarely bring those learners to the table. Our strength and our partners is really more on the industry partners. We have a membership of about 1,100 organizations across Canada, so we can kind of pull on that network. But in terms of the learners and the participants, that would be in the structure of the team itself. So I mentioned we typically see lead, specialist, industry. And so that specialist, you might bring in a specialist that has a pool of learners that need to be skilled or trained. So it would be in the formation of the team itself. That wouldn't be something that the supercluster would bring to the table, although we could support in finding that partner. Okay, so then we've got a great resource here, a good model in my experience. Thank you for sharing that. I'll take a look at that after this. Were there any other questions about the technology side of our approach to partnership, or anything in general that we've talked about today? I will say, if anyone's typing while you're typing, thank you so much for these questions. The last two sessions, the one we had with the training providers, was also engaged and had some really, really great questions and activity. So I so appreciate that. And I so appreciate everyone taking part in this today. And Annika mentioned that we'll be doing a follow-up, and part of that follow-up as well will be a bit of a Q&A session or an FAQ section where we'll get to unpack some of these as well. And if you have other questions, I'll put my email address in the chat as well if you want to reach out to me directly if you haven't already, so we can keep this conversation going. William says, always difficult to know exactly what might scale. I will watch Jeffrey Canada's YouTube video. Thank you for that. What might scale in education/human development, that is. Absolutely. I think it is really difficult to tell what will scale. And so that's a great example of what we're looking to try and navigate together, is what will scale, what can we pilot, what can we test in different markets to understand how to find that product market fit in one area, and then understand what will scale from there. It's such a difficult space to work in, as all of you know better than anyone, because everybody learns differently. Every company needs something different. The economy is constantly changing. There isn't really like a clear A to B that we can all take. So how can we together try and figure out what A is and what B is, and try and kind of share that path together. So really, really appreciate that comment. And I'll give 1 or 2 more minutes for any other questions or comments that will roll in, and then I will be talking to all of you hopefully soon, and hopefully you can join for the workshop on August 12th as well. Yes, I just wrote it, and I will just put it here as well.
We'll also have Sydney's email in the follow-up email sent out to everyone, if you need to refer to it.
Thanks, Annika. And yes, the recording won't be sent out automatically. It will be sent out in a follow-up email, I believe. Is that correct, Annika?
Yeah, later today, later this afternoon.
Awesome. So stay tuned for that. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it. I look forward to building these partnerships as we go. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions.